December 23, 2015. Ivano-Frankivsk, Western Ukraine, 3:35 p.m. The lights go out. Not one by one, the way a bulb burns out or a fuse trips in a kitchen. All at once, a single, clean cut, like someone reached into the sky and unplugged the sun. In the dispatch center of Prikarpattia Oblenergo, the regional power company, operators stare at screens that have gone dark. Their mice move. Nothing responds. Somewhere deep in the system, a cursor is moving on its own, deliberate, unhurried, clicking through substations like a man checking items off a list. The operators watch, paralyzed, as their own control panels are used against them in real time. They try to intervene. They are locked out of their own computers. Outside, 230,000 people lose heat on one of the coldest nights of the year. Hospitals switch to backup generators. Traffic lights die. Families huddle around candles in apartments that had been warm 60 seconds ago. In the dark, phones light up with confused calls to neighbors, to relatives, to anyone who might know what happened. Nobody does. Back in the control room, one operator picks up a telephone handset, the old kind, hardwired, impossible to hack, and begins manually calling substations one by one. His voice is calm. His hands are not. What he doesn't know yet, what no one in Ukraine knows yet, is that this isn't a malfunction. It isn't a blown transformer, or a winter storm, or a maintenance error. This is the opening act of something that has never happened before in the history of modern civilization. A nation's power grid has just been weaponized, not by bombs, not by missiles, by code. And the people who wrote that code have been inside Ukraine's energy infrastructure for over a year, watching, mapping, learning the system from the inside out, waiting for exactly this moment. How do you bring a country to its knees without firing a single shot? To understand what happened on that December night, you have to go back further. Much further. By 2015, Ukraine was already a country at war with itself, or more precisely, a country being torn apart by forces that preferred to work in shadows. In February 2014, President Viktor Yanukovych had fled to Russia after months of street protests. Russia responded by annexing Crimea. Then came the Donbass, a grinding, undeclared war in eastern Ukraine that killed thousands and displaced millions. The front lines shifted week by week. The headlines moved on. The conflict did not. What the headlines missed was the other war, the one with no front lines. Somewhere in the organizational structure of Russian military intelligence, the GRU, a unit existed that had no public name, no official acknowledgement, and no apparent limits on what it was willing to do. Western cybersecurity researchers would eventually call them Sandworm. The name sounds almost playful. The unit was not. Their origins trace back at least to 2009. They were patient, methodical, and technically gifted in ways that set them apart from ordinary cybercriminals, or even most state actors. They didn't just break into systems. They lived inside them, sometimes for months, sometimes years, learning the architecture, mapping the dependencies, identifying exactly which lever, when pulled, would cause the most damage. In early 2015, they turned their attention to Ukraine's energy sector. In early 2015, they turned their attention to Ukraine's energy sector. The entry point was almost insultingly simple. Employees at 3 regional power distribution companies received emails, routine-looking correspondence, the kind that arrives a dozen times a day. Attached was a Microsoft Word document. Inside that document, buried in the metadata, was a macro, a small piece of code, no larger than a paragraph of text, that asked for one thing: permission to run. Someone clicked yes. That single click opened a door. Through it walked black energy, a modular malware toolkit that had been circulating in cybercrime circles for years, repurposed and refined by Sandworm into something far more surgical. It installed quietly. It made no noise. It sent a small, encrypted signal back to a server in a country that would never be officially named. And then it waited. Over the following months, Sandworm operators began their reconnaissance. They watched as engineers logged in each morning. They recorded credentials. They traced the exact software, a Ukrainian SCADA system called Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition, that operators use to manage the physical switches and breakers controlling power flow across the region. They learned which substations fed which cities. They identified the serial numbers of the field devices. They even studied the phone systems used as backup communication. They were not preparing a hack. They were preparing a performance, every detail rehearsed, every contingency planned. By December 2015, they were ready. The timing was not accidental, nor Christmas Eve in the Orthodox calendar falls on January 7th, but December 23rd was close enough, a holiday period when staffing would be reduced, response times slow, and attention elsewhere. A cold front had moved in across western Ukraine, driving temperatures below freezing. The demand on the grid was high. The margin for error for the people who would have to respond was razor thin. At precisely 3:35 p.m., the operators in Ivano-Frankivsk watched their cursors begin to move. The cursor moved to the first substation. A single click. Breaker offline. Then the second. Then the third. The operator sitting in front of the screen grabbed his mouse and tried to pull it back. Physically wrestled with it, the way you might grab the wheel of a car that's drifting off the road. The cursor ignored him. It had somewhere to be. Within minutes, 7 substations in the Ivano-Frankivsk region were dark. The operators tried logging out, tried killing the session, tried anything that might interrupt the connection. Nothing worked. The attackers had anticipated every response. For every door the operators tried to close, Sandworm had already bricked the frame. Then the phone stopped working. This was the detail that transformed a cyber attack into something approaching psychological warfare. The Sandworm had preloaded a telephony denial-of-service tool, a program that flooded the power company's customer service lines with thousands of automated calls simultaneously. Civilians trying to report outages couldn't get through. Operators trying to coordinate between facilities couldn't reach each other. The communication blackout was total, deliberate, and precise. In the control rooms of 2 other regional energy companies, Kyivoblenergo and Prikarpati, Oblenergo's neighboring utilities, operators were experiencing the same thing at the same moment. 3 separate companies, 3 separate attacks, launched in perfect synchronization. This was not opportunism. This was choreography. Outside, the scale of what was happening was only beginning to register. In apartment blocks across Ivano-Frankivsk, people reached for light switches out of habit and found nothing. Old women in high-rises had no elevator, no heating, no way to call for help. Factories halted mid-process. The city, a place of 230,000 people that most of the world had never heard of, simply stopped. And still the cursor moved. And by the time Sandworm's operators had finished their work, the entire active phase of the attack lasted less than 30 minutes. They executed one final, almost contemptuous move. They deployed a piece of code called Kill Disk. Kill Disk did exactly what its name promised. It overwrote the master boot records of every infected computer in the control centers, rendering the machines unbootable, destroying the software that operators needed to restore power manually through digital controls. It was the equivalent of a burglar, not only robbing your house, but burning your spare keys on the way out. The operators were now working blind, locked out of their own systems, with no way to communicate, and no digital tools left intact. One by one, they did the only thing left to do. They drove to the substations themselves, in the dark, in the cold, and they began throwing manual breakers by hand. It took between 1 and 6 hours to restore power across the affected areas. For the people of Ivano-Frankivsk, 6 hours in sub-zero temperatures without heat is not an inconvenience. It is a crisis. But here is what kept Ukraine's cybersecurity officials awake in the weeks that followed. Not the attack itself, but what the attack wasn't. It wasn't maximum damage, not even close. Sandworm had access to far more of the grid than they used. They had been inside these systems for months. They could have hit more substations, in more regions, on 4 longer. They could have caused damage that would have taken weeks to repair instead of hours. They chose not to. They used, by all technical assessments, a fraction of their capability, which meant one thing. This was not the main event. This was a demonstration. The lights came back on. The questions did not go away. In the days after December 23rd, Ukrainian security officials and Western cybersecurity researchers began picking through the wreckage, forensically, carefully, the way investigators sift through debris after a crash to find the black box. What they found was both technically remarkable and deeply unsettling. The malware was clean, almost elegant. Every component had been purpose-built or carefully repurposed for this specific target. Black Energy had been customized with modules that understood Ukrainian SCADA systems specifically, not generic industrial control software, but the exact platform these 3 companies ran. Whoever wrote this knew the target intimately. They had done their homework with the patience of a doctoral student and the precision of a surgeon. The researchers from SANS ICS and iSite Partners, who published the first detailed technical analysis, used language that was, for the typically dry world of cybersecurity reporting, almost reverent. This was, they wrote, the first confirmed cyber attack to successfully take down a power grid. Not a proof of concept, not a simulation. A real attack on real infrastructure, affecting real human beings in real time. The word "first" hung in the air like a warning. Western governments took notice. Quietly, officially, in the language of classified briefings and closed-door committee sessions. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security sent a team. NATO observers came. Everyone wanted to understand the same thing. If it happened in Ukraine, could it happen anywhere? The answer, which nobody said publicly, but everyone understood privately, was yes. Then, almost exactly 1 year later, Sandworm came back. December 17th, 2016. Kyiv, 11:58 p.m. The timing this time was theatrical. Almost midnight on a Saturday, 2 days before Christmas. A single transmission station north of the capital lost power. For about an hour, roughly 1/5 of Kyiv's total nighttime electricity consumption simply vanished. The outage was shorter than 2015. The malware was not. What investigators found embedded in the Kyiv transmission station systems was something that made the 2015 attack look like a rough draft. They called it Indestroyer. Some researchers called it Crash Override. Both names were accurate. Where Black Energy had been adapted from existing criminal tools, Indestroyer was built from scratch, from the ground up, for one purpose only: to speak directly to industrial control systems in their own language. It contained 4 separate payload modules, so each targeting a different industrial communication protocol used in power infrastructure worldwide. It wasn't designed for Ukraine specifically. It was designed for everywhere. Indestroyer could, in the hands of a skilled operator, be repointed at power infrastructure in Germany, in France, in the United States, anywhere that used the same industrial protocols, which was most of the developed world. It wasn't a weapon. It was a weapons platform. The difference matters enormously. There was one more detail that investigators noted in near disbelief. In-Destroyer contained a wiper component, a destructive module sitting dormant inside the code, set to activate on a timer after the main attack. It would have destroyed the infected systems completely and permanently, burying the forensic evidence and maximizing the recovery time. But the only reason it didn't fire was a misconfiguration, a single incorrect timestamp in the code. Sandworm had come within one programming error of making the 2016 attack catastrophic and untraceable. The researchers who discovered this sat with that fact for a long time. One wrong number. That was the margin. For months after the 2016 attack, the word Russia appeared in cybersecurity reports in the careful, hedged language of people who know exactly what they're saying, but understand the diplomatic weight of saying it plainly. State-sponsored. Advanced persistent threat. Nation-state actor with significant resources. The circumlocutions were elaborate and transparent in equal measure. Then, in February 2018, the United States government said it directly. The White House, in a statement coordinated with the UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, formally attributed both the 2015 and 2016 Ukraine power attacks to Sandworm, and identified Sandworm as a unit operating within the GRU, Russia's Military Intelligence Directorate. It was one of the most direct public attributions of a state-sponsored cyber attack in history. The language was unambiguous. The response from Moscow was equally unambiguous. Total denial. But attribution, it turned out, was only the beginning of understanding what Sandworm actually was. As Western intelligence agencies and private researchers began pulling threads, the full shape of the unit began to emerge. And it was larger and stranger, and more destructive than anyone had initially estimated. Sandworm wasn't just responsible for the Ukraine grid attacks, they were responsible for NotPetya. If you work in cybersecurity, the name NotPetya produces a specific physiological response, a slight tension, a pause. In June 2017, what appeared to be a ransomware attack began spreading through Ukrainian computer networks. It looked like ransomware. It had a ransom note. It asked for Bitcoin. But it was not ransomware. The ransom mechanism was fake, a deliberate decoy. NotPetya was a pure wiper, designed not to extort money, but to destroy data, permanently and irreversibly, on every machine it touched. And it did not stay inside Ukraine. Through a piece of accounting software called MEDoc, used by nearly every company doing business in Ukraine, NotPetya spread outward with a speed and reach that shocked even experienced incident responders. It hit Maersk, the Danish shipping conglomerate, taking down 45,000 PCs, 4,000 servers, and 2,500 applications across 130 countries, paralyzing global shipping operations for weeks. It hit Merck, the pharmaceutical giant, disrupting vaccine production. It hit FedEx's TNT subsidiary. It hit Mondelez, Reckitt Benckiser, hospitals in Pennsylvania, government ministries across Europe. The total damage, an estimated $10 billion. The most destructive cyber attack in history by a significant margin, delivered by the same unit that had spent the previous 2 years practicing on Ukrainian power grids. Ukraine, it had become clear, was not the target. Ukraine was the laboratory. Every blackout, every failed manual override, every frozen control panel, all of it had been Sandworm refining its techniques, testing its tools, measuring response times, identifying weaknesses in critical infrastructure that existed not just in Ukraine, but in every modern industrialized nation. The grid attacks were research. NotPetya was the publication. And even NotPetya, catastrophic as it was, existed within a larger strategic logic that Western analysts were only beginning to articulate clearly. The concept of war conducted below the threshold of formal conflict. No declaration, no uniformed soldiers. No act that could be cleanly defined under international law as an act of war. Just persistent, escalating damage, economic, psychological, infrastructural, delivered through keyboards and fiber optic cables, deniable at every step. General Valery Gerasimov, chief of the Russian General Staff, had written about this concept in 2013, a paper that Western analysts later dubbed the Gerasimov Doctrine, describing a form of conflict where the lines between war and peace, military and civilian, are deliberately and systematically blurred. Sandworm was not a rogue unit acting outside policy. They were, by every available evidence, policy. The people who understood this most clearly were the Ukrainians. By 2017, Ukraine had established a dedicated cyber response capability that was, by necessity, among the most battle-hardened in the world. Ukrainian engineers had been patching holes, hunting malware, and rebuilding compromised systems under active attack conditions for years. They developed institutional knowledge that no training exercise could replicate, because the attacks never stopped. They just evolved. Viktor Zhora, a senior official at Ukraine's State Service of Special Communications, would later describe his country's situation with a bluntness that needed no translation. Ukraine was on the front line of a new kind of war, and the rest of the world was watching from a comfortable distance, taking notes and hoping the front line stayed where it was. It would not stay where it was. In the end, no one went to prison for the lights going out in Ivano-Frankivsk. In October 2020, the United States Department of Justice unsealed indictments against 6 GRU officers identified as members of Sandworm. Their names were published. Their photographs were released. Their unit number, 74455, was stated on the record for the first time in an official legal document. The charges included conspiracy, computer fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The evidence, compiled over years by FBI investigators working alongside private researchers, was detailed and substantial. None of the 6 men were arrested. They remain in Russia, beyond the reach of any extradition agreement, living lives that continue undisturbed by the $10 billion in damage their unit caused, the 230,000 people they left shivering in the dark, or the hospital systems they paralyzed. The indictments exist as legal documents, as historical record, as a statement of what the United States government knows and is willing to say publicly. As instruments of justice, they are, for now, inert. This is the part of the story that doesn't resolve cleanly. The 2015 Ukraine attack changed the way governments think about critical infrastructure security. Before December 23rd of that year, a cyber attack taking down a power grid was a theoretical scenario, the subject of war games and think tank papers and congressional testimony delivered in the language of hypotheticals. After that night, it was a documented reality, with a forensic record and a body of technical evidence that could be studied, shared, and built upon. Every major power grid operator in the Western world updated their threat assessments. The U.S. Department of Energy launched new initiatives around industrial control system security. NATO formally recognized cyberspace as an operational domain of warfare, alongside land, sea, air, and space. The insurance industry began writing entirely new categories of policy to cover what they now called cyber war exclusions, fine print that would become deeply relevant when NotPetya arrived 2 years later and companies discovered their existing coverage didn't apply. Ukraine itself was changed in ways that are harder to quantify. A country that had been fighting a conventional war in its east while simultaneously absorbing relentless cyber attacks on its infrastructure, developed a resilience that was partly institutional, not partly cultural, a collective refusal to be paralyzed that manifested in faster response times, deeper public awareness, and a generation of cybersecurity professionals forged under conditions no other nation could replicate in peacetime. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022, Western analysts braced for a catastrophic cyber war, a digital blitzkrieg that would accompany the physical one, taking down power, communications, banking, government systems simultaneously. Sandworm tried. They deployed Indestroyer 2, a refined successor to the 2016 malware, against Ukrainian high-voltage substations in April 2022. Ukrainian cybersecurity teams, working alongside Microsoft and ESET researchers, detected and neutralized it before it could cause significant damage. And 7 years of being the laboratory had taught Ukraine something Sandworm had not anticipated: how to fight back. But the larger question, the one that lingers after the candles are blown out and the manual breakers are thrown and the lights eventually come back on, is not about Ukraine. It is about the nature of the infrastructure that modern life depends on. Power grids, water treatment facilities, hospital networks, financial systems, all of it connected, all of it computerized, all of it reachable from anywhere on Earth by anyone with sufficient skill and sufficient motive. The 2015 attack lasted less than 30 minutes. The recovery took hours. The consequences are still unfolding. Somewhere right now, in a building that appears on no public map, in a unit with no official name, someone is inside a network they were not invited into. They are being patient. They are taking notes. They are waiting for exactly the right moment. The only question is which lights go out next.